Join me, Mark Windows, with Tony Hurst for Windows on the World Live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT at autonomousmedia.net.
Good evening, everyone. Sunday night, 9 o'clock, Thames Estuary. Mark's still away somewhere else, another part of the country, but I weren't planning on swimming across there and checking up on him tonight. How has your week been, Mark?
Oh, it's been great, Tony. Yes, I've just had a bit of time off, but I've also relocated. I'm actually in a part of North Wales at the moment, and apart from the weather turning a bit grim last couple of days, it's been interesting. I've been catching up with what people are saying in the pubs, and yeah, there are a few people even around here who know about Windows on the World, so that's great.
Wow, that's nice to know. Evening to Martin as well, has joined us again in the chat room there tonight, and maybe you'd like to call in a bit later. That'd be an option, wouldn't it, tonight?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, we want to get some reactions going in there, and basically if anyone's got any questions that they want to throw in, that'd be great.
Yeah, nice one. So, weather, it's big all around the world. Everyone's talking about the weather, and we've still got the global climate change business fraud going on, and some people are a bit bored of that, but we're not, because it's not resolved yet. They're still winning, as far as I can see. So what
they are and they aren't, actually, Tony. It's quite interesting, but of course we've got the Grinion Richard Branson, blaming the hurricane on climate change. Well, he's right in one way. It is about climate, and yes, it is a change of climate, but he wants to hook it onto his industry, the global warming industry, or the climate change industry as it's now become. And we're going to talk a bit about that tonight, especially about a new film that's been made by G. Edward Griffin, and he's releasing it on DVD. And this will actually really shift people, because he's got an enormous amount of fantastic information. What it lays out is the whole agenda behind the green agenda from the original sources. So in other words, what it does is it puts it together as a communist program which has nothing to do with environmentalism. And that is the most important aspect of what comes across in this series of lectures. You've got a huge amount of information and people involved in this, and I've linked it to windowsontheworld.net. If you go to our homepage, you can get a link directly to the film, which is called An Inconvenient Lie, obviously in response to Al Gore's lie, An Inconvenient Truth, which I think he's now made a follow-up to. And of course, this is getting put into schools, and that's also addressed, that it's part of Common Core education, so-called sustainable development. It's not about sustainability, and it certainly isn't about development. It's about absolute global control of everything. And so the climate change issue is not just about climate change. In fact, it's not about climate change. That is the whole deception of it, which is outlined brilliantly in this series of lectures.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it myself. I've just posted the link in our chat room. Thanks to everyone for turning up in there. Look forward to your contributions tonight. And I was watching just the first part of that lecture, just an hour before the show of the very first speaker. And already I'm quite intrigued by what's to come. So, yeah, looking forward to that.
Well, yes, and some of the speakers, of course, including Christopher Monckton, we've had at our banned climate change conference. So that was another thing, you see. We think things are getting worse now. Well, last year we were well on the way to where we are now, and it's getting there ever quicker with people being censored and banned from the internet. This series of lectures, was banned from University College London, even though it was actually being booked. The room was being booked by one of the professors who was teaching at UCL. Of course, UCL is a big change agent indoctrination place. That's really what it is. And of course, the lectures went to Conway Hall, and then Conway Hall didn't even put it on the website. But even then, we got some people from Windows on the World. There was a few came down who had seen the conference being advertised on the website. So that's great. And what I wanted to do really was promote G. Edward Griffin's new film, An Inconvenient Lie, which you can get from realityzone.com. And as I said, it exposes the whole climate change agenda. It proves empirically that so-called sustainable development is not sustainable and it's not development, as we've just said. Now, very interestingly, it features hard evidence which actually defines what the agenda's about, and it separates it from what we're being told. And it's all about those, and it's written and quotes those who are enforcing this. And first of all, we must not call it a hoax. That's quite important. As a hoax is something which has a humorous element, and this really doesn't have a humorous element. It's a deception and a front for global communism and loss of all rights through enforcement and education programs. And those education programs are in our schools here, and they're certainly in America and many other places. The biggest deception in history, this is, because it affects everyone on the planet. And 77% of the public know nothing about climate. They know nothing about it or how it changes. And 20% of those have a scientific background, which is quite interesting. So being kept in the dark is a very, very big part of this. So it's basically an extremist ideology. And it's promoted through a new form of original sin. This is something I was talking about a while ago, i.e. we are a blight on the planet. So it's original sin, and carbon taxes are our indulgence. Yeah. That's something I thought of a while ago. That's probably why the Pope is well on board with it, because obviously it fits in nicely with canon law and papal bulls. So it's an extremist ideology, and one of the speakers is Tim Ball, and he's currently being sued by Michael Mann, who was the creator of the hockey stick graph, ironically, because Tim Ball simply said that Michael Mann works for Penn State, but he should be in the state pen. And he got sued for it. And the court costs are going to be about $1 million or something. It's ridiculous, just for making that comment. But Mann has not explained his data or the models that he really used for the data. And he states that it's his intellectual property and that the public aren't entitled to know how he came up with this. Well, it affects the public, and it's been paid for by the public. So the sort of delusional element in this and the arrogance of these people is pretty scary, because these people have a lot of power. Yeah. Now, Mark Stein, he called Mann a disgrace to his profession, and Mann also sued him. And because Stein is in the US, he can countersue Mann for his fraud, you see, because you can countersue in the States. So he countersuing him. So this whole thing is getting quite funny, really. But some of the quotes in this film, maybe people out there have heard some of them before. But there's a lot of stuff in there you won't have heard before, and certainly there's a huge amount of information which I hadn't even come across, and I've been looking into this for years. But a lot of people don't know that Mikhail Gorbachev stated in 1987, this is what he said. He said, "We rejected the old world, now we are in the new communist world. There has been no internal change in the Soviet system, and we will defeat America." And he's quoted in Marilyn Brannan's book, The Wildlands Project, Its War on Mankind, that the threat of environmental crisis will be the international key to unlocking the new world order. Now, that's pretty powerful, isn't it, Tony?
It's very powerful, yeah. It's quite disturbing. And the other thing there about the fella Mann, was it not wanting to release his information to the public, even though they've paid for it, is the enormous expectation that they're putting on the public just to soak it up and believe it. So without something to back it up, then I don't know where that expectation comes from, really, because it doesn't make any sense to me that you would expect people to believe what you've said or what you've discovered, and then you won't show them what you've discovered. Well, this is part of the really creepy thing about it, and that's the world we're going into, what we're now calling the post-truth world. Well, for instance, Prince Philip stated to the World Wildlife Fund, "We reject the idea of private property." Now, that's rich coming from him, isn't it? Yeah, does that mean he's giving his away then?
Well, exactly. I mean, if you look at, there's a book a friend of mine, Kevin Cahill, wrote called Who Owns the World? And it's a list of who owns all the land in all the world. And yes, the Crown, the British Crown, claim ownership for quite a lot of it.
Yes, an incredible amount. But she's poor, though. If you're going to read the newspapers, they're all poor, them people. They need helping out.
Well, this is the thing, and this is another thing we're going to talk about, what actually social justice is. So all those social justice warriors need to learn what the controllers of this define as social justice. We'll get to that in a bit, but it's also stated that, you see, this is what the UN are putting out, that land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals. Now, this is out of the Communist Manifesto, you see. You may as well just compare that to the Human Rights Act. It's very, very similar to the Communist Manifesto. Our alienable rights are all disappeared under UN Agenda 21 and under the UN as global governance. So basically it says private land ownership contributes to social injustice. That's an interesting one, isn't it?
Very interesting, yeah. Getting back to the film there that you're talking about, that's a series of presentations, is that right? And
absolutely, yes.
From a conference. Well, you were saying there that it's going out on a DVD, and I think this is probably a good thing for getting things about in the future. For a lot of us, we might have to be moving back to certain media, because as you were saying there about Google, they're now becoming what I believe to be the modern book burners. They are actually seriously controlling the narrative and that. And I've been looking at some really interesting stuff that I'm pretty sure we'll be bringing up on a show very soon, maybe when we go into the Common Core, because that as well, it's got its links here, as everything does. And I was looking into those Common Core people, Indian company, believe it or not, running education in America, Canada, UK, and a few other places as well. And they've got an absolutely enormous growth rate for a company from India, and some of their friends and associates and investors are very interested indeed. And I think we've got a road coming through education that's going to allow these new technologies in the form of augmented reality to remove teachers more or less altogether from the playing field, if you like, the board, because this is all going just one way, and we've got it now in black and white from these people, how they're going to control children from the cradle to the grave is their exact words, where they want them. So we do like it when it's from the horse's mouth, but it's going to take a while to get this show together, because it's so convoluted and it goes into so many different directions that it's really of multinational interest. But we need to be having a little look at it from our aspect and America's, I think, at the minute, and tying that right in here to this restriction of information and the book burning that's going on.
Well, exactly, and teachers are meant to be apolitical, whereas we had a primary school teacher telling the kids that Trump was like Hitler. I mean, this is outrageous. And the thing with the average teacher, I mean, I used to live in an area where there were a lot of teachers, and they are arrogantly deluded, a lot of these teachers. I'm not saying they all are, but they are mentored into the program. And basically all this they're doing is hiving the kids into this Communist Manifesto, and they're attacking people who disagree with the consensus or the lie. So if you go against something, then you are a Nazi or a fascist or something like that. And this is how these teachers are now. And it's very, very interesting. I was speaking to some people from Russia several years ago, and they were telling me all about communism. And they said, well, look, even under communism, we were allowed to debate with the history teacher. Nothing was off the agenda in that respect. In other words, that they encouraged political discourse. Now, a lot of people wouldn't believe that, but what we're doing now, we're not going into the old Soviet system, as Gorbachev said. We're going into the new world order, which is a new communist system, which is basically a technocracy. And that's where it all ties in. It's a global currency and microchipping and all the rest of it. And if you look at schools now, I actually put this into my talk because it's very, very disturbing. Schools now have like 25-foot fences around them, and they do look like concentration camps. And when I looked at what happened to Walthamstow after I'd left, and I go back there quite regularly, I look through that place and there's more and more gates being put up. There's more and more things being cut off. We know all about the roads being cut off on the back of cycling for all, which is being basically put into all these children's minds. But we've got to think about this. I mean, if you go to school from being a child of 3 years old and you've got a 25-foot fence around you and you've got to scan your thumb to get your dinner, and you've got surveillance everywhere, and you're being encouraged by the state to snitch on your parents, well, maybe that's a bit like China. I think there's parts of China that are much freer. But when you think about it, Tony, this is an interesting point as well, that who's our major trading partner? Well, it's China, isn't it, really? Yep. Everything we get comes from there. So our global trading partner is a communist nation.
Yeah, but who was the communist nation built by? And what are these communists and socialists and all these different types of schemes that we've seen going over the last, let's say 100 years? Where did they all originate from? And are they not just different experiments to see how far you can go, where you can push people, take the good and bad from them all in order to finish, to put the final dressings on, if you like, this new world communism that we're going to enjoy pretty soon? I think that's the way I see it.
Yeah, it's just gone through refining processes, really.
Yeah, it's
not gone away.
To me, that's the same as what they're doing with cannabis. I know that's a massive change of subject there, but it's the same thing what they're doing, where they're releasing it in different ways, in different states, in different countries, with different laws and regulations around it. They're doing a massive experiment to see what works best for them in order to control it properly when they roll it out globally. That's the way I see it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'd like to carry on with this, actually, so we can get a bit of perspective going with
that. Was just an analogy. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah,
I didn't want to chuck you off onto a different subject. I'm just saying how this seems to work. And we've got an example of it there right now that's in a lot of headlines, and people can see all of these different experiments going on. Why is it different in all these different states? Why is it different in different countries? It's because they need to control it. That's the only reason it's been released, and that's what they're doing exactly with what we're talking about. So it's just an analogy, not a subject.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry, Tony. I got a little bit distracted because I've just heard from Mr. Corbyn. I think he's doing some weather forecasting, but he may join us later on if he can. So I was just replying to him, actually, while I was listening to you. So, okay, well, let's get back to this now. The UN also states that the world's population should be reduced to less than 1 billion, and this is actually what they're saying. People might not believe that, but all of this stuff is referred to in that documentary, that series of DVDs, which I think if you've got somebody that you want to get to look at this seriously and in any position of power, especially in your local council, they should be looking at this stuff, because the councils are the only places that can change this, and the councils have already been changed with change agents, so they need to be changed back to get rid of the change agents, if that's possible. And I think that if this gets out there enough, it is possible, because once the lid is blown off this, people are going to be very angry. And that is what they're scared of. We've talked about this before, haven't we? In slightly different contexts and with a different slant. But that's really what it's about. I mean, they'd be absolutely petrified if people found out what this was really about. But the ironic thing is, as I've just stated, is that they're already telling us. I mean, the people who work for the UN are making these absolute sweeping statements. Now, here's one from IPCC chief author of the first assessment report and chair of the IPCC Working Group 3, Dr. Ottomar Eden. He says, "We redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has nothing to do with environmental protection." And that's coming from the IPCC. They're telling you.
Yep.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yep, from the horse's mouth again.
This guy, J. Gary Lawrence, it was at the future of Agenda 21 in the new millennium. conference on June 29th, 1998. This is also interesting. He stated, participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any locally elected official undertaking Agenda 21. So we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. Now, they're just laying it out for you. They're telling you. They're actually telling you it's got nothing to do with all this green nonsense. It's not about environmentalism at all. They've just co-opted people on that as an agenda and also as a religion. In the 1998 Green Party conference, this is also an interesting point. They talked about the greenhouse effect. And it was stated at the conference that green issues are a powerful tool for a mass movement of political and societal change. We cannot wait for science. Now, you wouldn't really think that these people would be that blunt, would you? But they are. Again, it's down to the arrogance, isn't it? We've seen this with these groups like Antifa, these useful idiot groups. It's the staggering level of ignorance and arrogance. And that is exactly what causes violent, bloody revolutions. These are exactly the people who cause them, if we look at what happened, in a recent history. But basically, sustainability programs exclude anything that questions man-made climate change. Obama's Education for Sustainability, responding to global climate change through education, he was stating, we will do everything in our power to encourage education for sustainability. And one of the goals of the Communist Party was to control schools through the party line. And there is now a Ladybird book. Get this. I don't know whether people know this. There's a Ladybird book on climate change for young children approved by Prince Charles. Piers is actually writing a rebuttal to the Ladybird book for the kids. It's just incredible. But James Lovelock, remember him, the Gaia hypothesis, and he was really at the forefront of this whole thing, which has now become fake environmentalism. He's just recently stated, it was a few years ago, I think, said he wasn't sure that the whole climate change model wasn't crazy. He's just saying it doesn't make sense. And we also have to remember that there's a very interesting one that came before global warming, which was global cooling. And that went from the 60s to the 80s, and obviously from the 90s onwards, we're now into global warming. And during the global cooling era, they wanted to melt the Arctic ice by covering it in soot. Now, you can actually look this stuff up. It's there. People wouldn't believe it, but I remember that. I remember when they were talking about that. And this story was carried by Time Life and National Geographic. And John P. Holdren stated that 1 billion would die for global cooling. And John P. Holdren, obviously, he's the science czar to Obama. He's still in there, spouting this crap as well. And one thing that the conference clearly shows that we're referring to here is that the UN and the very dim media are working together for the agenda. That comes across very well. There's some independent journalists who make very strong points on that within the film. The UN Communications Group are training journalists to report favourably on the climate change agenda. They've co-opted the news agencies. And this guy's saying in that film that he's been to these UN conferences, and these lapdogs just take all this crap from the UN and they don't question anything. And when he brings things up, he's treated as though he's some kind of fascist. I mean, it's all it's across the board. It's everywhere. And this is a really good point, Tony. The 97% of scientists agree hypothesis. It was from this so-called journalist, John Cook. Now, they looked at about 12,000 papers. It was just under 12,000. And only 65 endorsed the global warming theory out of 12,000. So that's less than 1%. So that's a great rebuttal to that 97%. All sceptical papers were excluded. Well, it's like saying the sun has nothing to do with global warming, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is what the IPCC actually say. They weren't allowed to put that in on the instruction of Maurice Strong. So it's like the IPCC leaving solar activity out of their climate models. Indeed, yes, it's exactly like that. They also leave out volcanoes, which produce much more CO2 than humans ever could or have. And of course, a lot of those volcanoes are under the sea. And we're actually in a historical low for CO2. Now, this guy, William Happer, was a speaker at the conference, and he wrote a book on global warming in 1982, and he was a climate change believer at that point on long-term CO2 levels. This is what the book was about, and he now states they got it entirely wrong by overestimating CO2 levels. Now, I think he's the first speaker in the film, and he gives a very powerful presentation. We also have to know that a coal power plant output is directly in ratio to human emissions of CO2. So when they show you these, basically the cooling towers, there's steam coming out of there, and people they actually make the point that some people think that that's CO2. The problem for coal is that natural gas is a third of the cost, and that's why coal is not as popular, even though there's a lot of it. And these power stations now are so clean, they're incredibly clean, But also brought up in the film is that temperatures at ground level are highest and drop rapidly up to 35,000 feet. And then after that, it warms again due to the sun's temperature. But the clouds actually throw a lot of this back up into the upper atmosphere, low clouds. You have low clouds and high clouds. And this is all brilliantly explained in this film. And the water vapor hinders the heat also. And the high clouds keep the heat in, and the low clouds have strong cooling effects as they reflect the sun's rays up into space. So it's all about altitude. So when they're talking about global surface temperatures, that's another thing that's rather misleading. And another thing that this guy brings up is that plants have not evolved to keep up with a small amount of CO2, and they create a sugar called rubisco because they can't absorb enough CO2 because there's too much oxygen. Now, having this too much oxygen in the plant literally poisons it, so it has to create this substance. Basically, it's like hydrogen peroxide that the plant actually has to produce because it's not getting enough CO2. That's really interesting. And this stuff it's just stuff that you don't get in one place. There have been some brilliant documentaries. I mean, there's the Great Global Warming Swindle. That's a good film, but there's a lot more in here, and those who try and debunk this would really be up against it because, as I said, all this stuff is sourced. It's from the original sources. And this is a great warning as well. And they make this point in the film that the Czech leader, Václav Klaus, asked why would we want to go back to communism when he looked into the climate change agenda. He said we've just got rid of communism. This is communism. He wrote the book Blue Planet in Green Shackles. And it's also brought up that, of course, we've got to remember that Darwinism is very big in this, and people might not see the connection, but his biggest influence was Thomas Malthus. And he stated the population would outgrow the food supply. And it was a major influence on Darwin in the late 1800s. Now, of course, this never came true. And Galton's eugenics came out of this completely flawed idea. So the whole basis of this fake environmentalism goes back into that. It goes into social engineering. Paul Ehrlich stated that England would not exist in the year 2000. This was in his book, The Population Bomb. So nothing that these people have predicted has ever come true. Nothing.
Not even close with a lot of it. So.
No. Absolutely not. And of course...
Go on.
No, it's all right. I was just saying, I mean, Maurice Strong obviously started all this off because he went begging the United Nations for money to kick all this into place. And the United Nations just utterly went along with it, which is incredible because he's an international criminal. He's dead now, but he had to flee to China. His auntie had an affair with the leader of the Communist Party there. And so, yeah, the UN were instructed by Maurice Strong that only human impact on climate change would be considered in the model. And they didn't even question it. I mean, the whole thing is, it's incredible. I mean, I had some of this information, but certainly not all of it. And there's like a mountain of information that comes out of this. When we go back into original Agenda 21, it's actually started in the late 60s, really, and early 70s. That's when this blueprint for the Agenda 21 started through the environmental movement. And this 1987 was when it really kicked in. There was a report that came out called Our Common Future, relating environmental problems to poverty, taking money from wealthier nations. Again, social equity. All of these words are newspeak, and they are the opposite of what they actually are meant to mean. It's quite interesting. The 1992 Rio Earth Summit, of course, was where the action plan for Agenda 21 came in. But, this film I would recommend to anybody.
I'll certainly be watching it. Maybe later on tonight, hopefully. There was something I was going to say, but as usual, I've lost it. It'll be back in a second.
That's all right.
Should have made a note.
Well, it's interesting because there's also stuff in there about China, the way they're creating cities on top of basically railway stations. And that's exactly what Walthamstow has turned into, because Walthamstow had a huge amount of public transport. You've got many British rail stations there. You've got 5 or 6 at least. And you've also got the Victoria Line. And I moved there because of the road links. But obviously, those are all going to be restricted. And if you look at the model of these Chinese cities, they're just like what they're doing in Walthamstow. They can't do it all at once because they can't knock down all the property that people have bought, even though that it clearly states that property rights are not sustainable. So private property is, I think, the thing that could kick this off with people, because they've paid enormous amounts of money for property, and they've got to be careful there, because they can't have it both ways. You can't inflate the property market as much as they have and then start taking away private property. But that was something that we might cover in the second hour, actually, Tony, because we have looked into how they're doing that, and they're doing it on, I think, quite a large scale. I have no way of monitoring this because I can only go by what people tell me through the website and people who write to me, and from my own sort of network of people which I trust. The people that I do trust are the ones who've thoroughly investigated it and have the empirical evidence that the courts are complicit, the police are complicit, bailiff companies are complicit, and obviously, because the court and the Crown are complicit, so is the government, right? So the government are complicit in property theft in this country, and that is a fact.
Wow. Okay, I did remember what it was that I was going to say a little while ago, so we're going to have to step back in time just a little piece, and we're going to be talking about weather forecasters, especially in America, having to sign non-disclosure agreements, very tight ones from my understanding, and that weather that they then read out on their weather channels is being directed to them from the same companies that probably just coincidentally own the patents on some rather interesting weather manipulation or even manufacturing devices. So I'm wondering how it is that they're managing to get, there's probably a lot of other people wondering this as well, because we do keep saying these things, and yet there's an awful lot of people out there in the mainstream telling us a completely different story, which is the fraud we're talking about. So how do they get so many people to back up their stories and to cover what they're saying? Because it's extremely widespread, isn't it? You've not just got weather people talking nonsense to you and telling you these stories, and then they're all wrapped up in these agreements. How do they get it that as far out as what it does go with people, do you think, to just keep spreading their misinformation? Because there's a lot of intelligent people talking the opposite story, is what I'm saying.
Yes, there is, but they don't have a voice. I mean, it's clearly seen at our climate change conference that... Sorry,
by the opposite story, I mean the opposite story to what we're saying on here.
Yes.
Right, there's a lot of them.
Exactly, there's a lot of them, but you have to remember that they're being educated and mentored into it, and also being financially rewarded. And some of these people are just really prostitutes to it. they are not interested whether it's real or not, but it's lining their pockets. And also, another important thing is NGOs, non-government organisations, didn't really exist before the 1950s, and they are a huge part of what's going on. And of course, in order for them to survive, they have to be lobbied and they have to be putting out the party line. And that's exactly what's happening. So you're seeing these organisations, which I call the Big Society Change Agents in my article. If you look in that Big Society Change Agents, there's links to how it all works. And people haven't really got a clue how interconnected the whole thing is, because they're not given any of that information. But if you only have to look at ICLEI, which is the local government initiative for sustainable development in every country, and your council will have a link to that. It doesn't matter where you are. So on a sort of corporate scale, and we've got to remember that this is corporate governance, it's kind of hard to get that over to people. I was talking to a guy in the pub the other night, and he's very switched on, but he's very hard left. In fact, you could say he's from the old-fashioned Communist Party, really. And I was telling him about this stuff, and I sent him the link to the films today, so it'll be interesting to see what he comes back with. But, I mean, he's a very intelligent guy, but he said, this sounds like capitalism. So, because it's a post-truth world, that people think that global communism is capitalism because it's done under corporate governance, you see. And then people say, well, that sounds like fascism. Do you see what I mean? None of these terms have any meaning anymore. But if you look at the Communist Manifesto and compare it to the UN plans, then they're pretty much identical.
Yep. But it is evolving into something new, as we were saying earlier. Something for all of us eventually. That's what they've got planned in black and white. We've seen it many times in many places. So there you go. Right, here's a message for Anonymous 4735. You're obviously not paying attention to the topic, and we're not really going off a topic with questions tonight. So if you want to
get involved in that,
if you want to keep it on topic, then maybe we'll ask you a question. But yeah, so what next then, Mark?
Well, it's all very interesting. I mean, I think it's quite good to go into some of this stuff about lobbying that you just brought up, how it links into this, because there's so many different objective points that were made, not just about CO2, but about, as I said, the whole of the agenda from top to bottom. And there's some great information from what's this? I'm just trying to get this. If you can bear with me a minute, Tony. Yes, this was. I think Tim Ball's speech is absolutely brilliant. He's featured quite early on in the conference and gives some great quotes and also a very humorous perspective on it. There are lots of different speakers, and basically they look at how sort of science has progressed or not progressed. And for instance, things like E equals mc squared, Einstein's theory was basically about the speed of light and saying that nothing travels faster than that. Well, they've now found that there are things that travel faster than the speed of light, just all this stuff's brought up in very, very strong detail. And of course the ice cores as well. That was another thing that was very fraudulently put forward to the public. And of course, a lot of the CO2 is lost anyway when they pull these things out. So yeah, there's 85% of the world there is no climate data for at all. There isn't any climate data for it because it's oceans or forest or desert. And there's no data collected there. So that's 85% of the world we haven't got any climate data for. So that should throw the whole thing out of the window to start with, shouldn't it?
Well, it's pretty amazing, really. But this thing is full of amazing facts that if you look into for yourself, you can prove to yourself one way or another pretty easily, I would have thought.
Yeah. And it's clearly stated in here that every prediction they've made since 1990 has been wrong.
Yeah.
Every single one, you know.
There is one thing that I would add about greenhouse gases, CO2 being a greenhouse gas. I don't actually disagree with that because, as I said when Piers was on,
yes,
all commercial greenhouses inject CO2, and it is a gas, into their greenhouses in order for their plants to grow to their full potential. So they've got that kind of right, but they're misrepresenting it.
Yeah, exactly. And we have to remember also that the whole thing about the climate change agenda was the Climate Research Unit in East Anglia that changed it from global warming to climate change because there's a PR problem, obviously, because it wasn't getting any warmer. So rather than say, oh, it's not getting any warmer, they just changed the name of it. So, I mean, this is like what you get with dodgy businesses, isn't it? You just get them to change the name of it and it'll trade as something else. Basically just liquidate one company and start another one up. And of course, it is all about corporate governance. So that's pretty much the model of what they're using. They're just using a corporate model. So basically, if one thing doesn't work, just fold that company and start another one up and call it climate change.
Yeah, there also may be some truth in the term man-made climate change as well, because obviously we do have some effect on our climate. I can't deny that there's some effect, but how big it is, to me, it's pretty minuscule. But the man-made climate change that they don't really talk about is getting an awful lot of news because of these hurricanes and that, and this is manufactured weather that's being used as a weapon, or weaponised weather, as you like, which is kind of a bit on from what I was saying earlier about the weather people getting fed their information from those that have the patents on the devices that clearly do exist, and you can check them out for yourself. As always do your own research. Take my word for nothing. But they are out there. So I wonder what part of it, if any, has been factored into any of this so-called climate change business. Is there any note or reference to any of these devices actually being used anywhere? I've not come across any. Have you?
No, but we know that David Keith has made these wild statements regarding geoengineering, and he is actually quite insane, the things he comes out with, especially with spraying the sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere, openly saying that that's a good idea. And I think the thing is with these people is they're owned by corporates and they're detached from reality. So they're quite easy to manipulate as well. So, yeah, it goes through everything really, doesn't it? I mean, we're talking about something that interlinks into so many different agendas. And this weather modification thing, I've looked into it. It's very difficult unless you can actually see patents. And that is the problem. You know, some people have shown that there are patents for weather modification, but they don't necessarily, from what I've seen, show anything really sinister. I mean, we know that weather is manipulated. Obviously, had the Linford flood in the 50s. That was weather modification. We know it exists. I mean, I spent years looking into the chemtrailing issue, and it's a very difficult one because unless you've got absolute proof of inside information, I mean, okay, we've seen these planes that have been converted inside. I mean, on that level of things, you get, okay, well, I'm sure they exist, but I've never actually seen one myself. So we don't know. I mean, I went up with Max Bliss. We went to RAF Northolt, and we saw small passenger planes with blacked out windows. And he said that, no, those look like spraying planes. And they did. But I've got no proof that they are, you know. So once you start looking into this, this is where we really need proper independent journalists, because we need investigative journalists who can really get into this stuff. And there just isn't enough of them. We need more. So what's happening is we're getting less journalists. We're just getting these pathetic repeaters who don't want to question anything, who are mentored into this program and just spout conspiracy theory every 5 minutes. And they just give this stuff back to the publications that they work for, and they're just PR handouts, basically. That's all they are. And as we said earlier, the UN are mentoring journalists into this program. So the whole thing is controlled on all levels. So I would just say we need more investigative people. I mean, Max Bliss, I've been speaking to him for years about this, and Max has really looked at, he's got some brilliant research and great papers, but most of the stuff that we look at and we have looked at is actually in the public domain. It's just the public don't know about it. What we need to see is the stuff that isn't in the public domain, isn't it, Tony?
Yep. Like you say, though, it's digging it out, getting people with time. I'm going to send you some patents, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow.
Right.
And some imagery of certain things that are going on out there. Maybe we'll look a bit deeper into that. Be nice to get some real backup on it, because there's quite a bit of scaremongering going on out there. I'm pretty convinced of that in the weather modification and geoengineering circles. But as per usual, somewhere between the left and the right in the middle there is the truth. And there is certainly some stuff going on. But not as bad as a lot of people are making out, I don't think. Some are saying that our whole climate has collapsed and it's all being generated by man now. When I looked into this just a little bit, I've only got a little way into it, but there is some bits out there that are worthy of further investigation, such as the amount of fires on land at the minute in South America and Africa, and that just happens to be both sides of where these pretty big hurricanes are originating from. And the fires... Yes. The fires are having an effect on our climate as well, as our old mate Jimmy used to have Kevin Hester on from over in New Zealand, and he talked a lot about the amount of fires in the world back then, and since then I've kept up with a little bit of it, monitor it here and there, and it does seem to be pretty suspicious, let's just say, the amount of fires that keep cropping up and burning away, and it's a lot of the planet is actually on fire at this minute. And how much of that is getting factored in all of these climate change figures that we're told are fact and they're not disputable? Is any of that factored in, as far as you know, Mark? Because I don't remember seeing any of that factored in.
No, you won't. And I've read the AR4 document. Maybe we can go through some of that in a little while. I mean, but it's all the speculation and the nonsense and the flawed models and projections that we've come to know and dislike. But the thing is that I find, Tony, the problem is that no journalist I know has read the AR5 document, yet they'll spout that man-made global warming is real and all the rest of it. They've never actually read the UN documents. And that is ridiculous, because that summary document, it's only a few pages. You don't have to read the whole report. But just the summary document is actually where the policies are coming out of. And that's a major problem. And if they won't even look into it, then that tells you everything you need to know. But when we're talking about this stuff, we're talking about military technology, the military industrial complex and all the rest of it. And we know that there's these organizations that are doing some very, very strange and worrying work in pushing forward different types of technology. And of course that goes into the Internet of Things and all the rest of it. But when we look at this idea of weather modification, a lot of it is secret. Now, the thing is with the chemtrail thing as well, which I wanted to bring up, was that I don't think anybody has ever produced anything that's really reliable. There are people, some whistleblowers, so-called whistleblowers, and there is some good information out there. A friend of mine was getting a lot of soil samples from up and down the country and getting them analysed. And yes, nanoparticulate aluminium, i.e. not naturally formed aluminium in the soil, because the soil does contain aluminium, but in natural compound. But this nanoparticulate high-density aluminium is actually very prevalent in soil. And when asked why this was, the scientists that Ingrid Dickinson knows, Ingrid Dickinson runs a website called Earth Breathing, and they couldn't explain it. They had no explanation for it whatsoever. So that in itself is quite disturbing. But when people say that everything's dying, I don't actually think that can be true. There are areas where a lot of things do seem to be dying. But if this kind of hypothesis that they were spraying aluminium and barium in these huge quantities, then I would have thought a lot more would be dead by now, because this started in I think it started around 2010 when it got really, really heavy. I don't know whether you remember that, Tony, but the skies by 5 o'clock at night during that summer in 2010, it was just an absolute crisscross, which had turned into this haze every day. And there was a coldness there. It was very, very strange. You'd just get this, it was almost like an eclipse. You'd get this thing, God, the sun's gone out, you know. The heat would actually turn from that warmth that you get in late summer to a very odd kind of cold, like a refrigerated cold, not even like a natural cold. Do you remember anything about that, Tony?
Not really, no. I wasn't onto the chemtrail thing back then. It was only come to my attention about 5 or 6 years ago, so...
Yeah.
I'd not paid no mind to it, even though I'm a photographer and that. And this is how easily we can suck things in, I suppose. I do a lot of landscape photography, and I was doing the photography at the time, and it wasn't until it was pointed out to me that I actually thought, oh yeah, what are they all doing now? So, yeah, I've missed that. Jack's just added a comment to the chat. Nano spirals of metals can be caused by lightning, and that's something else we'll talk about in a bit.
That's
lightning.
Really interesting. I'd like to hear more on that, because I want to get more informed on this. It's just that I find you can get to a point with it and you can't get past that point. I mean, what I'd love to happen, it's like with anything, you know, I'd love to be able to find giant's bones, you know, I'd love to be able to prove that this spraying program was being done on an industrial scale, and by whom, what, where, why, and when. You know, these are the things we need to get out there. But it's interesting that even the national press have covered chemtrails and said the chemtrail conspiracy theory, and that was actually part of something in the Daily Mail a while ago. It was in one of the top 10 conspiracy theories, and basically they are quite useful, I suppose, because they let people look into it. But that's where propaganda fails, isn't it? They said one conspiracy theory suggests, and then, of course, people go, oh, I'll have a look into that. And once they do, of course, it will backfire. But that also goes into all this surveillance stuff and the creation of the British Army sitting on Facebook all day trolling people. They're called 77 Brigade, based in Reading, Berkshire. You can see the link. It's in several articles I put it into, but one was called... martial law terror clowns. I think it's linked to that article, and you can see the Guardian piece on it where they're announcing it. So they're basically, it's all public knowledge that the British Army are on Facebook, and that doesn't count all the private contractors. And that's something I want to bring up in a future show, Tony, because I did uncover private contractors who are working against people like us and who are using very nasty techniques. And I've got absolute evidence of that in my article called Police State Harassment Exposed. I uncovered not only the site and why the site was operating, which was inciting hatred against myself, David Shaler, and quite a few others. I found that site was owned by people who had been in contact with me and were trying to check me out. I didn't realise that was happening at the time. They were trying to check out what I was up to. And then I found out how they were linked into the French Secret Service, one of the business partners, and one of them linked into the telecommunications industry in this country in a massive way through VoIP phone technology, which is voice over internet protocol phones. So I put the whole thing in the public domain, because these people who were big shots, they were really big shots in the security industry, were also inciting hatred against me on a website that was owned by one of their companies, and all that is exposed in that article, Police State Harassment Exposed. I think we could do a whole show on that, Tony. But this is the point I'm trying to get to, is that it's this inadvertent stuff that people come across. It's very, very important, and some of the people I've met in the past have had this amazing information and not put it out anywhere. But it's also a matter of safety. I mean, this is a slight side issue, but with a lot of this stuff, it's much better to put it into the public domain. It's much safer in the public domain. And I've always advised people to do that. So if people have that sort of information, put it in a public domain, and it's safer. If you're walking around with it just in your own head, you could be in danger. You know, that sounds a bit far-fetched, but it's not really.
Yeah, public domain, and chuck out a few DVDs as well to people with an interest in the truth. Jack wants to know, and I'm interested in this as well, do you know anything about nanoparticle additives in jet fuel?
I looked into it a bit. Again, I think it was Max Bliss who had some information on that. Now, we covered this a long time ago. I haven't gone into any of this stuff for about 18 months, so I'm a little bit rusty on it. But what I can do is dig out some of the archive, because when I do shows, I put everything down that's in that show. And what I might do is go back through some of our stuff, because my first ever show was on chemtrails at the David Icke TV, TPV. That was the first show I ever did. And it was funny, actually, because Michael Murphy was meant to be on the show, the guy who made the film about geoengineering. And we couldn't get hold of him at all. And a year later, he says, "Hi, Mark, I'm up for that interview now." And ironically, Michael Murphy has now disappeared again. So if anyone knows the whereabouts of Michael Murphy, get him to get in touch, or let us know how he is and what's progressing with his film, because the last person I spoke to was Mona Norman, who was actually on that first show we did about chemtrails stroke geoengineering, and she says nobody's heard from him for quite some time. So that's quite important that that Michael Murphy, if he's out there, gets his information out and resurfaces. So yeah,
that happens to a lot of people, doesn't it? They just disappear for a while and then pop back. Well, some never come back, but
yeah.
But it does happen a lot. Yeah, it's interesting, Jack's stuff, and I've seen a couple of videos that he's posted in the past. I mean, we was 3 years ago, Jack, or at least 2 years ago, Jack and myself and a few others here, we was on opposite ends of the spectrum again when it came to chemtrails, and we've been probably a pretty shining example, I must say, to people how you can remain friends and have a completely different point of view on something, right? We just have a bit of banter about it, and I don't really mind what Jack believes, and he don't really care what I believe, but he's got his truth and I've got mine. And over the last couple of years on this subject anyway, we've managed to come together and meet in kind of common ground. We're both kind of giving away with a bit of it, and that's quite a good thing to see, I think, because we've got too many people falling out when they have disagreements, people who were friends and all that, and that's not the way to go forward. Have a debate, keep raking through it and bringing up your facts and your evidence, and push on, and eventually we'll get to know the truth, hopefully, about some of these things. And again, I think there is two way off sides with the chemtrails, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And something else that ties this in now, you mentioned earlier about global cooling, global warming coming up many times in the past and that, but what we haven't mentioned, and what very few extremely avid activists for man-made climate change have never heard of, but really ought to have if they're going to have any opinion on this subject, is global dimming. And I've got this suspicion that global dimming is not talked about by anyone. One, because it's not that well understood, but two, it's got something to do with what's going on in the skies, whether that is a nanoparticle additive to fuels, or whether it is all of these other things, or a mixture of both, what's going on up there. I've got myself pretty convinced that global dimming has got a big part to play in this, and yet it doesn't get spoken about. What do you think? Are you there? Oh, okay. I think I might have lost Mark. So it's just me rattling away to myself and the listener. Where's he gone? Call me back. Hold on. Let's go. What's going on? Righto, it's nearly time for a break anyway, so I'm going to take a break and see if I can get Mark back. Let's have Clint Eastwood and Stop That Train. Top version.
The next train will be leaving from platform 1.
Welcome back. Got a guest with us this half, and I don't know whether I'll get an answer to my question. Maybe I will, because Piers might not be about for too long, but Piers is joining us. How you doing, Piers? Had a good week?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I'm been doing a bit of forecasting and following tropical storms in America, where we've made a few predictions and observations.
Nice
That's
one.
great, Piers. We just need to introduce you to the audience, I think.
Yes.
Piers is Piers Corbyn, brother of Jeremy, and he runs weatheraction.com. He's no stranger to my show, so people who know about Windows on the World will have seen Piers, and they'll probably see him again on it very soon because we're going to do some filming when I get back to London. Piers has been quite busy. He's not actually seen the whole of the film for the Inconvenient Lie DVD, which is a great way of waking people up, especially people who may be a bit older as well, because older people tend to watch DVDs more than younger people. But it outlines the whole of the indoctrination program in a series of brilliant lectures. And of course, Piers has spoken alongside many of the speakers who are featured in the film. So, Piers, yes, welcome back. And what have you been up to? Yeah.
Sorry, say that again?
What have you been up to recently? Because
right. I've been issuing a long-range forecast of tropical storms in America, and that forecast starts the middle of the month, and there's going to be quite a lot going on until November. And we've been observing these recent ones, and pointed out that the recent ones, namely Harvey, and then Irma and Yosei and Katia, all formed on periods of very high solar activity involving solar flares and so forth. And when they speed up or get more intense, there's also, generally speaking, solar activity going on. So we use our predictions of solar activity increases to forecast when these storms are likely to form. And that has been successful in the past, so we decided to do it again.
It's a shame, really, that the BBC won't have you on to talk about the hurricane, isn't it? Because we've got it all, or even Sky News, because they just plaster it wall to wall all day with archive footage of hurricanes and talk over it. But it'd be nice to get someone who actually knew what they were talking about on there. But then that's not really what they want, is it?
No, but they want to do. No, of course they don't. They want to carry on with the CO2 story. Yeah, and they know that if I go on there, I'll tell them it's nothing to do with CO2. Because
yes,
you see, just ask yourself the question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions to ask, but I mean, for example, these are big storms happening now, and we've had all three in a row. Now, is there anything else happening in the world or in the solar system of extreme types now? And the answer is yes. It's big bursts of solar activity. And has CO2 done anything strange in the last week or two? And the answer is no, nothing whatsoever. So, you see, if these things are CO2 driven, then there has to be some change in CO2 to make them happen. But there's been no change at all. Yet they just somehow claim they're vaguely to do with CO2. And it is really such utter nonsense. I mean, if you ask yourself, see, there's been a great big solar flare. The biggest solar flare for 11 years happened on the 6th of this month. Now, the last time there was a solar flare that big was on the 5th of December 2006, which was at the same time, that was actually the end of a super typhoon, Durian. And on that day, Durian powered up again at the same time as it was hitting Saigon. So, you know, you just look back in the past for similar things and you see they are repeated. And the last time there was a Category 5 hurricane hitting Florida was Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Now, that formed and powered up on a solar flare event on August the 17th, 1992. Just like the one that has happened recently formed on the solar flare event.
Well, this is it. And obviously, this is your business and this is what you do. And you used to win quite a lot of money betting on all this, didn't you?
We did, yes. We betted on various aspects of the weather in the British Isles with William Hill. And the odds were set by the Met Office, and on average I won 40% of stakes placed every month.
Surely, though, Piers, with a success rate like that, the UN would want to employ you, wouldn't they, for their long-term forecasts and also for your views on climate change?
Well, one would think so, but you see, I think, as it says on the film, the whole story of man-made climate change and the whole of globalization and globalism and the stories it puts out are fiction, and they're designed to control people.
Well, for anyone who doesn't believe that, Piers, in the first part of the show, I outlined the quotes from those who are at the top of this agenda, i.e. those who influence and are part of the UN, and they openly state that the environmental green agenda is nothing to do with this actual implementation of Agenda 21, but it's being used as a front for it. They openly say that.
Yeah. No, I agree with that completely. I mean, well, I've just put a online demand for evidence from a couple of people. For example, the Green Party leader in America, and she's made a statement that the oil companies are busy using their influence in the media now to prevent the truth coming out that tropical storms are caused by CO2. Okay, so I put a question. I said, well, you just made that up. Give evidence now that these oil companies are using influence in this way. And I also pointed out that actually the oil companies support the man-made climate change story, and very specifically Rex Tillerson, former chief executive of ExxonMobil and now Donald Trump's Secretary of State, supports the Paris Accords. Well, he's not opposing the Paris Accords. To hear that again, he supports the Paris Accords, even though his boss is opposed to them. But he's sticking by his guns because obviously he knows what the interests of ExxonMobil are. So the idea that ExxonMobil are meddling around in the media to spread falsities about to promote or rather to attack people like me is a nonsense. They actually support the climate accords.
Yes, but this is the thing, isn't it? The post-truth world. We keep talking about it, and that's all it is. And I think this film really, it goes beyond debunking, because what they're doing is they're giving you the empirical evidence of what these people are actually saying, what it's actually about in their own words, and that the whole thing is global communist agenda, this new form of technocracy. And that's all it's about. It's not about anything else. So I think that's why this film's important, because there have been some great films on the global warming scam, indeed the global warming swindle, which features you. But this one, I think, ties so many things together, especially the way it's being used as a religion, and it's being used as a tool to re-educate children, and it's being mentored into every part of society by these change agents, and really what are useful idiots to this agenda. And the whole thing is it revolves around population reduction. And you've clearly got the quotes from people on this film that you can quote to anybody and say, well, they said this, and this person was head of the UN at this point, and how the UN came out of the old. Basically, it's the Soviet system, the old-fashioned system was going to be changed into this new system, and that is what is behind Agenda 21. And that's completely stated by Mikhail Gorbachev. And there's so many quotes in there we went through in the first part of the show, which I don't think you heard, but I would say it's really powerful because, yes, we also featured in this film is, of course, Viscount, or as they say in America, Viscount, Christopher Monkton. And we've had quite a few laughs with him.
I spoke to him on the phone 5 minutes ago, by the way.
You were speaking to him. What's
he's appearing on the Alex Jones show, so you're talking about that, and I'm going to be on the Alex Jones show later on, I hope.
Right. Okay. So, can you tell us what you were talking about with Chris Monkton?
Well, he was talking about faults in the calculations done by the global warmers themselves on their own theories of feedback to cause global warming, and he's pointed out in their own terms they're wrong. And he's got a scientific paper floating around which is running into opposition to get publication. But, he outlined the points, and I said, well, of course, that's right. I mean, they're wrong in their own terms. Even if you assume their basic idea is true, he's pointing out that the mathematics they use is incorrect, which is fair enough. And he's going on to Alex Jones to, I think, talk generally about the scam of the CO2, which is the point you've just been making.
Absolutely. And yes, I think he actually finishes off this particular series of talks. There's some other people in there you'll probably be aware of. There's William Happer.
Yeah.
The Real Inconvenient Truth, More CO2 Benefits the Earth. He gives some brilliant information in that for people who are interested in real science. And it's stuff that's greatly detailed. Got Tim Ball. His global warming is the biggest deception in history.
Yeah.
And he's actually, his talk is one of the best, I think, because it's very humorous. And of course, he's getting sued by Michael Mann. We went into that in the first part of the show. So Michael Mann has committed the fraud, but because Tim Ball stated that Michael Mann works for Penn State, but he should be in State Penn, that Michael Mann sued him over this. I mean, these people are so huge.
Well, I could repeat that.
Yes,
Could I be sued as well?
Yeah. And of course, Willie Soon, who's been greatly derided by these globalist puppets.
Yeah, I've met him in New York a couple of times.
Yeah. Christopher Monckton, of course. Global warming is a monstrous hoax. Patrick Wood, they call it Science, Global Warming and Technocracy. Now, he has a very good site, which I would recommend anybody sign up to. It's called Technocracy Now, and he sends several articles a day sometimes on the ongoing agenda of global control grid through technocracy. And these are things that should be spread around, because if the public really knew about this stuff, then they would wake up to the whole thing. So definitely recommend Technocracy Now. And then it goes into the education agenda, political indoctrination, with a woman called Holly Swanson. And we've also got someone talking about geoengineering, weather modification and weaponization of nature, a guy called Jim Lee. So there's it goes on and on. There's many people involved in this.
Oh, that's a superb list. That's definitely.
Yes, there's some absolutely great angles on this. Even Native Americans, pawns in the Agenda 21 game. That's Elaine Willman. So they're covering pretty much everything that could be covered. And there's a guy called Alex Newman. I've just listened to his lecture. It's fantastic. It's called They Call It News, Global Warming and Propaganda. We spoke a little bit about that in the first half, and how he goes to these UN conferences and he's like the fish out of water with all these mentored puppet so-called journalists just basically spouting back UN trivia mouthpiece kind of propaganda,
Fake news.
Yeah, it's very good stuff. So Freedom Force International, is that something you've come across before, Piers?
Yeah, I've seen, most of what you've listed out I've come across and met in some of these people in New York as well, Willie Soon in particular, who's, a serious active scientist that sort of got dragged into these things because he saw it was nonsense. I think there's two fundamental things that people ought to understand. First of all, we should always look at everything in scientific terms, and that requires evidence of any theory. And if the evidence doesn't work, the theory is wrong. Now, these people promoting man-made climate change and everything else don't use science. They're anti-scientific. The second thing is labels. There's a lot of labels bandied around all the time, and the labels are used to confuse and divert you from scientific analysis of reality. And I think the left-right labels are total confusion now. What we're really on about is globalization versus accountability. You could describe what they're putting forward as a kind of new communism, because that's what they call it. But to call it any sort of communism in the sense of socialism, which was put forward by Marx or Engels or Lenin or whatever, I think is misinformation.
Well, it's interesting, Piers. I was talking to someone who last night was a member of the Communist Party, very intelligent guy. Doesn't get hot under the collar about many things, really, but about the right things. We were actually talking about your brother last night, and he was very pleased to hear what I told him, and I was outlining a few other things that he wasn't aware of. But when I mentioned this Agenda 21 program, he said it sounds like capitalism.
Yeah.
So we are. The whole thing is so distorted because it's done under the global governance is done under a corporate structure, and that's really the best way of explaining it, I think.
Yes. Well, absolutely. You see, if you look into who backs what, all these anti-FA people are funded by George Soros, who's one of the richest men in the world, and they operate for the biggest corporate interests in the West, who want to save their profit levels in the competition with the rising force of China and India. Now, this is a totally capitalist agenda, but they've put a left label on it to basically stymie people who would otherwise resist them. So we've got all these greeny people jumping around, opposing coal mining, for example, when they used to support the miners, and so forth. So the way the ideology of climate change works is it undermines trade unionism and the ability to fight back for all sorts of things, because it justifies deindustrialization and the removing of economic power from the West, which in fact has been done, which is why we've seen lowering living standards in the West.
Yes, it's collectivism and consensus. Yeah. And that's really what the UN article on human rights is all about, because then again, it defines us as a person. A person has rights. A person has some rights. Now, the inalienable rights don't come into it anymore. There's no such thing as inalienable rights, because it's all about collectivism. And what the whole agenda is about doing is marginalising anybody who's not part of the agenda. And that's exactly what Antifa do. And that's exactly their role. They are there to basically act as police state thugs, and under the guise of being kind of socialist. It's the whole thing is incredible. Basically, they are just
beating up someone you don't like just because you don't like them can't be socialist. I mean, you can call it what you want, but it isn't that.
Exactly, and it goes into all these movements. I mean, Occupy now is a big part of this stuff. I mean, Occupy has been hugely co-opted into that agenda and was from the start, and I saw how that happened. And of course, the Occupy movement introduced general assemblies, all done under Delphi technique, and their security, get this, I don't know whether people were aware of it, but their security team, who kind of came in if there was some trouble or an argument or somebody going against the party line, was called Tranquility. So this is the sort of 1984 Brave New World and Clockwork Orange language that we're hearing from all quarters who are involved in this. And basically, it's just one agenda. It's not a complicated issue. No. It's basically they're saying you're either with us or you're a terrorist. You're a domestic terrorist if you do not agree with us. Yeah, so the role of talking about terrorism all the time, of course, helps putting people they don't like into a box of something very, very bad. That's interesting. Did Tony want to ask something? I hear silence.
I did. Yep.
You did? Well, carry on.
No silence.
Well, going to ask something, ask forth.
Yep, we've got a question from the chat from Freeman Jack. Does Piers know any direct local impact from recent US weather? Gulf Stream disruption, perhaps? Right.
Well, the extreme weather there is driven by the sun, which is also driving extreme events here. And we have got these kind of a rotating pattern of three lows coming across the British Isles, more or less as we speak, which must be connected. And it, in fact, negates the forecast we had for this period, which was to have much finer weather. But we've got a understanding about why this has happened now. But that's what I would say. So there's a common cause there. In terms of what's going to happen to these hurricanes, well, some of them do scoot off into the Atlantic and head towards the British Isles. And in the coming month or so, there will be some of them which will do that. Whether they'll hit or not, Britain is an open question, but very likely they will, or at least one or two will. And that is put in our long-range forecast, which takes tropical storm formation in the Atlantic area up until November, end of November.
Okay. Well, Martin Houston added to that all these hurricanes are starting in the Gulf Stream where the Gulf Stream actually starts, so it might be having an effect. And also, in the first half, I was talking about fires. South America and Africa, in particular, are having an incredible amount of fires at the moment, and I'm wondering how, if any effect at all, that might be having on that particular area, because, again, that's both sides of where this is all starting.
Yeah, well, the fires won't be affecting us, but the thing to understand about these fires, and also extreme cold which happens, and cold blasts, because one reason for these storms happening, you have to look at the details as to why they're so intense. I mean, they've been formed because of sudden uptick in solar activity after a period of quiet. That's the formation of them. But when they develop, they need to have what's called a low shear. That means as you go up in the atmosphere, the wind direction doesn't change too much. And if it changes a lot, then that messes up the formation of the storms into very high systems. Right now, we've got a very low shear, and that is partly to do with the mini ice age wild jet stream circulation we've got, where you can have colder air coming down, meeting warmer air in places, but the general effect has been this sort of quieter formation system, or more easy formation system, which has allowed the Irma to grow hugely as it was coming across the Atlantic. It's not entirely true they all form where the Gulf Stream starts, but they're certainly developing rapidly in that area, i.e. in and near the Caribbean. A lot of these storms form sort of further out in the Atlantic towards Africa, then come towards the area you mentioned, and then they get powered up and maybe hit the Gulf of Mexico or bits of the edges of that, or Florida, or just head off into the Atlantic.
Okay. I saw about 3 or 4 days back, maybe 5 days ago now, that there was another massive CME that was facing us, coming towards us. How long before the impacts of that are felt?
Oh, they've already been felt. That was on the 6th of this month. The 6th of September. Now, the radiation from those things are immediate. 8 minutes for that radiation. So those X-rays reach the Earth and affect things pretty well straight away.
Wow.
There is a rush of particles which follows, but because their energy is so high, some of those particles or electromagnetic effects come within 15 minutes. And there was a great big pair of solar flares that happened on August the 15th, 2010, I think it was, when the Russian heat wave got disrupted by this jet stream moving, which moved after a gigantic explosion on the sun. And it started changing within 15 minutes. Now, the main particles, though, take longer. I mean, that's an electromagnetic effect that takes 15 minutes, so that's about half the speed of light. You see, it takes 8 minutes for direct X-rays to reach us. The particles come any time between, say, half an hour or so and 4 days. Most of them take about 4 days, but the energetic ones, which are obviously, well, not obviously, but quite often more important, could just get, 2 days later and so on. And, of course, that is pretty well what's been going on, because 3 days after the 6th, you got the 9th, which was when we had these sudden increases in activity of all the storms operating at the time, namely Irma, Jose and Katia. And as Irma was approaching Cuba, it was powering up and then hit Cuba and sort of bounced off and came back. It's doing a sharp right turn. Now, we have a prediction that when there is a lot of extra solar activity, these tropical storms will power up and tend to turn right. And that is what happened to Irma. We don't know quite know exactly what standard meteorology was saying it was going to do anyway, because they were also saying it was going to turn right. So we don't know if it. We think it did turn more right than they would have predicted, but the fact it was also hitting Cuba confused things a lot, because when these things hit land masses, then they basically have to start reforecasting, because there's discontinuities in everything that's going on.
Okay, I don't remember the exact paths, but I do know that there was a big difference between the ability to forecast accurately Harvey and Irma. I mean, they knew well in advance what Harvey was going to do, and it was all spot on, didn't they? So what would be the difference there?
Yeah, that is true. Well, yeah, I think that is a very good point. I think Harvey was largely going through the Gulf of Mexico when they were giving these forecasts, and that temperature across that was relatively uniform and pretty high. So they could say with a fair amount of accuracy what was going on. The case of Irma, it's going across areas with different sea surface temperatures, and also a hell of a lot of islands, big and small, and those will interrupt what they were saying. Now, their calculations of track range basically from going straight through the centre of Florida from the bottom to going to the left and going to the right. We thought that the powering up would make it more go to the right. Now, the storm did tilt to the right, but it tilted late because of the Cuba thing. So although it went hard right, it didn't go to the right hand of Florida, but basically went whack into the middle of Florida, into the centre, or even the slightly left of centre where it's heading now. But basically, under any of those scenarios, Florida was going to get whacked all over big time because it's such a large storm.
Do these solar events also have an effect on the earthquake, let's say, that we just had in Mexico?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. The X 9.3, which, as I said, was the biggest X-ray solar flare for 11 years, that was followed as well as the storms by also on the it was on the 8th, I think it was, the huge earthquake in Mexico.
Okay.
Reached an 8.1 level. Now that is big, very big. The American system for earthquake measurements basically classifies 6. M is 6 has been very big, and so a 7 is 10 times that, or 5 times that, whatever. And then the next one up, 8 is another multiple, the same multiple. So an 8 is a truly enormous earthquake.
Okay, and there's also measurable, drastically measurable increase in volcanic activity in Yellowstone. Again, directly related.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So the place to keep your eye.
All these things happen, and what we think is going on is that it's not like particles directly hitting the Earth. It's the magnetic effects. It's the magnetic fields are linked into the roots of the Earth, if you like. So wobbling and changes in those caused by the solar wind, which is affected by these solar flares and so forth, will cause some tectonic plates to shift a little bit when they weren't otherwise shifting, and that can make all the difference, and therefore you get a tropical storm or hurricane forming. You see, tectonic plates are in the process of, they're trying to do something all the time because they're pushing against each other. And in the summer, in the Caribbean or in the warmer parts of the Atlantic, tropical storms are things which are always about to form. They're trying to form, if you like, but they need some trigger. And the solar events affecting the upper atmosphere and middle atmosphere and enable them to take off. And earthquakes are doing a similar thing. So it's not surprising that earthquakes, big earthquakes that is, associated with big solar flares and tropical storms are related in some way like that.
Okay, so all around the world we've got lots of volcanoes and we've got lots of fault lines and places where earthquakes can happen and weird weather can happen. So why is it that the Americas have got it so bad from top to bottom, it looks like? Is that something to do with their position when they was hit by certain particles or certain stuff from these CMEs? I need to understand that a bit better.
Well, I would say two things. One is it's late summer, and therefore it's the storm season, and storms form over the warm waters. But they need a trigger. The average situation in America, though, is for the last 11 years or 12 years, there's been a big shortage of tropical storms. There's an increase right now over quite a short period of time because we've had generally quiet sun, but there's sudden, quite rapid and extreme increases which are doing the triggering. Why America as opposed to anywhere else? Well, it's probably not opposed to anywhere else because I mentioned some things happening in Britain, and if you look around the world, there probably are more extreme events going on. It's just that the media is focused on America.
Well, I'm just going from in 1 week we've had 3 major hurricanes, a big earthquake, and the increase in volcanic activity, massive increase up in Yellowstone. So that's the length and breadth of the Americas.
Area, that's true, actually. Yeah, interesting. Well, I have to have a think about the tectonic plates, but I expect you'll find there'll be some stuff happening in Asia soon. I mean, our forecast for tropical storms it includes typhoons, and we do have increase of typhoon action happening in the middle and end of this month, which will be paralleled, we think, by some things happening in the Atlantic region. But basically, these systems are worldwide. But it's an interesting question. There could be some reason why America is more receptive now, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thanks for giving it a go. I did have a question for Mark just before the break, but we lost him, and it'd be really good to get your opinion on this as well.
Okay.
Basically, everyone seems to be leaving global dimming
Is
out.
Mark there now?
You there, Mark?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm listening. It's very interesting, guys. Very interesting.
Everyone, both sides of the climate change debate seem to be leaving out global dimming from the equation. And the more I think about it, the more I think that maybe the chemtrails business that might be a bit misunderstood has got something to do with global dimming and what the possible ramifications of sorting out global warming without sorting out global dimming first. Now, I don't know why this doesn't get talked about at all, because it seems to me that the dimming has got a massive part to play in the big picture. So I don't know whether any of you could expand
I think
on
that's
that.
True. But by dimming, you mean the spreading of particles and junk deliberately in the atmosphere in order to reduce the effect of the sun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, now, yeah, I think, first of all, it is real, it is happening, and there are people who I describe as Dr. Strangelove mad scientists doing it because they think that global warming is happening, which is not. But there has been warming, but we're now into cooling, and it's nothing to do with CO2. I think the difficulty we have is that lots of people claim stuff they see in the sky is caused by chemtrails, when it's very difficult to distinguish between a chemtrail and just an ordinary vapor trail. And that fact is, of course, used by the powers that be to confuse everybody and avoid talking about this stuff. But there does have to be an inquiry into it. You see, I would think that at some point in time, some members of Parliament have to get their heads together and say, look, is this happening or isn't it? And ask the authorities in the Army and the Air Force what is going on. Now, they will be able to find out, even if there are people who don't want to tell them, in which case, a public inquiry into what is going on in terms of chemtrails could reveal quite a lot. Because it's not actually untrue. I mean, if you probe around, you can find plenty of stuff, even conferences on the matter, which show it is true. There's a question of how effective is it, and I think that's an open question. But obviously the military want it to be effective to eventually control the weather. So maybe in 50 years' time, we won't be talking about what the sun is doing, but what some some machine or dust system has been doing. I don't know. It's a dreadful thought. But as it is now, I don't believe they've got anything powerful enough to do very much, and what they're doing is largely experimental.
Well, that paper came out, didn't it, owning the weather by 2025?
Yeah.
And global dimming, that has been actually even announced by NASA. They were talking about that quite a long time ago, and they were stating that it was because of the amount of aeroplanes up there. And, of course, we know that a big part of Agenda 21 and the fake green lunacy is to stop us from flying. And that's not just on the back of terrorism. It's on the back of the green lobbyist lunatics who we quoted a few weeks ago, stating that I think it was the leader of the Green Party actually stated that anybody who takes a plane to Spain is the equivalent of somebody who would stab somebody in the street. So these people are beyond hope, really. But it has been
around the big aeroplanes.
That's right, yes. But
how many people has he stabbed?
Yeah, well, it all ties into the whole bigger picture, which we go into every week, really. So every show is interconnected. But yeah, I think this is a very big issue, because I think it was something like 20 to 30% dimming since the 80s. Have you seen those figures, Tony?
Yep, I've seen them. BBC Horizon, some 5, 6, maybe more years ago. I watched it with the missus before I knew anything about this climate change fraud. And the actual programme itself, I think, was pretty relevant and quite good. But what I found fascinating about the subject was I never heard a single thing about it anywhere after, and it just disappeared, the subject. And I know NASA did make a statement some years ago and get into it at some degree, but it just disappeared off of the table. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've heard nothing about it. Unless I've brought it up, it's not been mentioned.
No, but that's again refers back to what we started to say in the first part of the show, with these people being mentored and basically fed the party line, and they just repeat it. So nobody is actually looking into this. These things do just get forgotten. We've seen it recently, of course, with Syria. We discussed that last week. I think that because of North Korea, Syria's now been forgotten. But Syria's only been forgotten because Assad's won the war and kicked out ISIS. And that's why it's been forgotten. And journalists don't really seem very keen on looking into that either, do they?
No.
They certainly don't. Well, you see, maybe North Korea argument is a bit of a diversion for the reasons you mentioned, because I don't believe there's going to be any nuclear war. I think we brought that up last week. I mean, that was the title of last week's show, wasn't it? Yes. Absolutely. But on this 20% dimming, I can't accept that figure, because if they're saying the sun has been blocked out by 20%, that would give us an ice age, you know. So that can't be right. But I don't know what they mean by 20%.
No,
I think it's experimental stuff.
Difficult. That's difficult. That because
ineffective as we speak.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I was just quoting what they'd said. I mean, I think you could probably still find those papers online anyway.
But see, there could be fake news commentators going in there to come up with figures like that. So then people like me or you can say, but hang on, that can't be real because we'd be in an ice age. Therefore, all this stuff is not true. So you see what I mean?
Well, exactly. We've been into
stories about stories which are put there to divert. And there's all these flat earth people jumping around now, which seem to get associated with me. Therefore, I'm a flat earther. Well, you know, it's complete nonsense. I mean, all this flat earth stuff is just a confusion about refraction around.
What's flat earth got to do with predicting the weather, Piers?
Well, nothing whatsoever, except if I appear in a meeting where there's a flat earther or a Holocaust denier or anything else which somebody doesn't like, then I can be associated with them. And then my brother can be associated with me, who's associated with them, and so forth, you see. So all this stuff goes on and on. And all I can say is just be careful next time you get the bus. Who's next time you get on the bus, just have a quick shout. Are there any Holocaust deniers on here? Because if so, I'm not going to get on the bus because I don't want to be associated with you. You see what I mean? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, exactly. And we've been through that in quite a lot of detail the way all that happened, and you can find those shows in Windows on the World. And of course, yes, the Keep Talking group has been attacked by Antifa. This is a group of old age pensioners who was formed in the tea rooms at Harrods about 20 years ago, and they are now the chosen target of Antifa in this country. So things couldn't get any stranger or more absurd. But yes, it's the old, oh, I suppose you think 9/11 was an inside job. I suppose you're a climate change denier. And I suppose you also think that Elvis's brain is on the moon. This is how they do it.
I don't believe that one.
No, but the third one's to ridicule you even more, you see.
Oh, I see. I fell into the trap, yes.
Yes, it's the Trinity. It's the Trinity of threes.
Right.
Third thing always emphasises the point and is the one to be remembered, yeah.
Right. Okay.
I'm not sure that anyone only associates with people that they agree with 100% on everything, do they? Does anyone associate with people like that? I don't know.
No, we've done that show on the echo chamber effect, which came out of Demos, but basically you've got that guy who's just resigned or got sacked from Google, and he was saying that Google is the echo chamber. And Google, well, the whole point of Google was to become the echo chamber. So I think people should, use other search engines, but we've got a bit of a problem there. But also, like, boycott Wikipedia. That's really important, to boycott Wikipedia and just use other sources, because that is at the top of everything. They are controlling the narrative on everything. And there's so many people who've been on Windows on the World over the year who've reported that their stuff is just getting changed on Wikipedia all the time. And this also happened, interestingly, when a friend of mine was changing the information on Momentum and John Landsman on Wikipedia. This will interest you, Piers. That was getting changed in real time.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm perfectly... Yeah, I mean, I believe all that. They'll meddle around with anything in the Labour Party, especially my brother, or anything I do about climate change or you do about this, that and the other. So before we get disappeared, I would urge anyone to go to apart from Windows on the World, come to weatheraction.com and also
absolutely.
Follow my Twitter feed at Piers_Corbyn, which has got lots of stuff about these hurricanes on. I'll repeat that, at Piers_Corbyn. Jolly good.
Jolly good, yeah. Wikipedia, other book burners, they are as well. That's what they are.
Oh, is there an alternative to Wikipedia then? I mean,
it's actually not going to them as a source, because when I do my research, Wikipedia always comes up at the top of the page, but underneath that there's some really, really good sites, and the information is available. I was doing some research into Francis Bacon the other day, and there was lots and lots of information that's not on Wikipedia. Wikipedia just corrals everything and changes it when it needs to and controls the narrative, which is what it's there for. And there are really, really good alternative sites that have all that information, which has obviously been filtered and put onto Wikipedia in the way that the agenda has to be. So there are lots and lots and lots of other sources. I mean, when you Google something, here we go again, because we have to Google things, even though we use other search engines.
Google is a word to describe it, isn't it?
Well, yes, and unfortunately, but there are many, many other sources.
Do these other search engines, not search engines, things like Wikipedia, alternatives, do they have an editing process whereby somebody somewhere is getting in there changing things?
I'm more talking about source information, Piers. So, in other words, the real sources of this information are there under Wikipedia. It's just that Wikipedia comes up first. But when you look at the other sites, they're usually much better. And Wikipedia is there for people who just want to do a bit of research quickly onto something and get an overview. And so many so-called journalists now just cut and paste their introductions about people from Wikipedia. Yeah. So if they were going to get some of the people who have been on our shows, they would think twice. They've go, oh God, he's a climate change denier, and he said this and he said that, and none of it's obviously true. And what they do is they take you down this road of discrediting people, and a lot of journalists are influenced by that. Well, they're not journalists. This is what we keep talking about. They're mentored into a program, and they just cut and paste things. So the cut and paste so-called journalists will use Wikipedia as a source when it actually shouldn't be relied on or trusted at all.
Spot on.
Yeah.
They even control who goes on Wikipedia as well, what people will have on there. And I remember a couple of years back, Abby Martin, when she was really big on RT, they wouldn't have her on there. And I don't know whether she's on there now, I don't go to look, but like I say, they're modern day book burners, just like Google. And if you don't believe that, and you like it from the horse's mouth, do some searching for Eric Schmidt, ex-CEO of Google, and listen to some of the things he's said, particularly that there should only be one answer to any question. So there you go.
Well, exactly. It takes us right back to where we started from at the beginning of this show, Tony, and that often happens, doesn't it? We go full circle, which means, I think, that we've covered quite a lot. And I think that, an inconvenient lie is great
to
send on to people who are sceptical about what's being said about this global conspiracy, and they think it's a conspiracy theory that will absolutely shock them into reality. And it has irrefutable evidence, empirical evidence, that the whole thing is a scam. It was thought of in the first place to be a scam to fool the public. And once the public wake up to the fact that this is a program to fool them and take all of their assets and freedom away, then things might change. But until then, we're going to have an uphill struggle and also a bit of fun. I think we have to start enjoying this as well and basically poke fun at this kind of gigantic, overblown, egotistical mammoth organisation, the UN, and all of its NGOs, and all of its crazy and quite deranged employees. And we've talked about a lot of different things there. We've even mentioned David Keith, the lunatic geoengineer who wants to spray sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere. So he's really into global dimming, and I've seen him in action. We went up to Oxford Union, and these people are detached from reality. I don't know whether you could call him a psychopath. I've no idea whether he is one. Some people do call him a psychopath, but he's definitely detached from reality. Sorry, Piers?
Yeah, they're Dr. Strangelove characters. I call them after the Dr. Strangelove in the film, i.e., sort of mad scientists that will do anything crazy because they have an obsession with something or other.
That's absolutely right, yes. And it is a technocracy. That's the whole point of it. It's a scientific dictatorship. But the ironic thing about that, when we call it a scientific dictatorship, is that there's no science in the dictatorship.
Someone's made a point in the chat room there that if you want to order this DVD, that is going to cost $20 for shipping, which is probably a bit much for a lot of people, I would have thought. Well,
we're not discussing the price of it. We're discussing the information. And the thing is that it is a bit of a problem being on DVD anyway, but I suppose that they want to try and get some money back for Freedom Force International, which is obviously G. Edward Griffin at the helm there. And, of course, he's made so many films for nothing, as have I. And I suppose they're just trying to get a few funds back.
You're missing the point, Mark, right? This is about the shipping cost from getting the DVD.
Yes, I know that.
So it's not about paying people for their work. I don't think too many people have got a problem with that, and they understand that. So what we actually need is a way of getting it from the UK.
Yes.
That would help, and from other countries, because if there's good information there that people ought to be viewing, then they shouldn't be prohibited because it costs $20 just to get it to them, plus the price of the DVD.
Is that, Tony, it will be streamed online at some point and maybe pay-per-view for the whole thing. I should think that's the way they'll go with it. I think they're just aiming for DVD
in England.
And
who they can. Yeah,
I've posted the link in the chat anyway. For now, you can actually watch it on the website live. The link will also be in this pod, and it'll be there on Windows on the World where it already is. Yeah,
it's actually linked to Windows on the World homepage, and that takes you to exactly where the films are, so you can watch them for nothing. Yes, I think they're going to take them off, and then they'll probably stream the whole thing as pay-per-view, but that would be better, obviously. Yeah, the shipping costs are a bit outrageous for that, but $20, yeah, okay. So I don't know how much the DVD is, actually. I haven't checked, but I've only just been looking into this over the past couple of days, but it's all on their website.
Yep, okay, great info, gentlemen. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Well, I would say watch those storms. They're very interesting. Come on our website, weatheraction.com, or the Twitter feed, Piers_Corbyn.
Thank you for joining us, Piers.
Go to Windows on the World next time.
Okay, Mark, what you got in store this week? Anything you want to tell us about, or is it a surprise for next week?
Well, I've been working on a series of essays called The System Explained, which goes into administrative law and the whole thing, because I've covered it quite a lot, actually. I've covered it on Chuck's show, and we've talked about it quite a bit. But I'm trying to pull it all together into something that's rather updated, because, of course, we had the free man on the land movement, and then we've got into looking at the administrative system and taking that apart. And, of course, the result of that is what we've been talking about tonight, property theft by bent administrative courts and officials on every level, including the government, by letting it happen. So, yes, I'm working on that, and we should be hearing a bit about that over the next few weeks.
Very interesting. Look forward to it. There may be some disruption to the Ocelli effect this week, because Chuck is actually in some predicted paths for the hurricanes that are going on out there in the centre of Georgia. In a floodplain he is, so hopefully it's going to miss him. But there may be some disruption, so we'll keep you informed on that. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back next week at 9 o'clock. Have a great week. Cheers.
Thanks, Tony.
Cheers, Tony.
Cheers.